Now we sprayed the lighter shade along the trailing edge, or in this case the leading edge, of these panel lines. We're going to do that to all of the panel lines on the airplane. We'll go front to back and towards the outsides of the airplane. Because I've made this paint into a tint, we can go back and forth till we're happy with the effect that we get. You want to keep it really subtle. This effect overdone will make a model look pretty bad. As well as going side to side along the edge, you throw in a few streaks here and there from front to back. And we're going to mask some more difficult spots where it's just impossible to get a post-it notepad to wrap around a contoured surface. So we'll just carefully wrap it around, following the panel line. And it's important that you use drafting tape and not masking tape when you're masking over the top of a painted surface. Masking tape is a much higher tack and sometimes will tend to pull your paint right off. Same process now. Well, you've got that mask in place. You can come and hit some of the straight lines with the post-it notepads. Some of these little access panels up around the nose, they're just too difficult to mask all the individual sides, so I'm going to cut them out of a piece of transparent tape. Use a brand new X-Acto knife blade when you do something like this, and we'll do the same thing, spraying the front edge. I'm going to use a toothpick to help me lift the tape up so as not to scar the paint. So using the transparent tape, cutting out this one panel section, we were able to highlight just this individual panel that would have otherwise been almost impossible to mask. Now along the leading edges of the wings and the stabilizers, all the sharp leading edges on the fuselage, I'm going to come in and add this highlight, as well as some streaks. Using the fine line tape, masked around the nose, sprayed the radome the gray. I've also masked this contoured line here, sprayed the anti-glare panel black. Note also that I've highlighted the anti-glare panel as well as the radome while I had them masked up. Same technique used for highlighting camouflage. A little bit lighter shade of black, mask the individual lines, spray towards the back of the plane. In the case of the radome, I masked, sprayed towards the front of the plane with a slightly lighter shade. The next step is to bring out the rivets and panel lines with oil paint. In order to do this, we're going to coat the model with Future Floor Wax to protect the enamel paint underneath. I'm using Future Floor Wax straight out of the bottle. You can thin it if you like, but believe me, it's already pretty thin. Spray on a thin coat, continue moving, continue coating the aircraft. We're going to be giving it 2 or 3 thin coats. And on a model this large, by the time we finish spraying the first coat, we can come back to our starting point and start spraying the second coat. Smaller model, I would allow it to dry a little longer. I've mixed black, white, and raw umber oil paints in a beer cap here. I've come up with a complementary color to the camouflage scheme, in this case a dirty gray that is not too dark. Don't want to go too dark on this. And what we're doing, we're going to pick out the panel lines and rivets with oil paint. And you begin just by scrubbing it into the cracks and lines, rivets. Don't worry about your slop. Then we come back with a piece of tissue. and remove it. And let's come back with some Turpenoid, a piece of tissue. And take a little bit out. What I'm going to do now is use a little bit of straight black and hit some things like ailerons and control surfaces. Get a harder line. And a bigger contrast than what I had on the panel lines and rivets. And you can see the effect of the rivets here. On the top here we've got a series of vents that we're going to pick out in a straight black. So I'm doing the same thing I did on my flaps and ailerons. And we'll just put a little bit of black oil paint in the cracks. I come back in with the tissue, wipe away the excess. A little bit of Turpenoid to remove the stain from the paint. And there you've got some vents. They now have a little more life than if you had left them unpainted. If you're having any trouble keeping the oil in the cracks, it doesn't want to stay in, what you can do is come back with a knife blade and rescribe those lines. Same thing's true with the rivets. If you've got a few rivets that the oil won't stick in, you can come back with your little drill bit, or you can come back in with a compass point or a needle or pin. And now those rivets that wouldn't work before come to life. You know, judges at contests, they'll look at a model, and if you've got a line that's partial, if there's a little bit of oil here and no oil here, they're going to mark that against you. So you want to make sure and make all the lines even. Go back. Okay, we've sprayed our model with a gloss coat. We're ready to put our decals on now. Now I've chosen an Iraqi paint scheme, so I've went out and purchased some aftermarket decals. Now I'm going to prep the surface with Microset. This cleans the surface of the model. And position it according to the instructions provided. And check it with a reference. I'm going to put a little bit of Microsol on top of that to soften the decal. It'll make it conform to the surface better. Careful positioning is very important. The decals should be aligned properly. Judges will look for that. Okay, now I'm going to apply a small decal, and I'll exclusively use a paintbrush to handle this. Now going back to the flag, I've noticed that it did not suck down into the rivets there, so I'm going to put a little more Microsol over those rivets. I take a straight pin. You can use a needle or a compass point. Carefully poke holes in the decal to let some of the air out. Now, decals that are applied to both the left and right hand sides of the aircraft should line up properly. If you've got a model where they're not supposed to line up, you should bring photographic evidence of this to the contest with you. Judges do check to see that decals line up properly. Okay, now I'm going to come in and paint the front gear well to demonstrate some washes. And I'm taking a brush dampened with paint thinner, not excessively wet, lightly wetting the surface inside there. I'm going to take another brush, get some Turpenoid, mix with my oils to create a wash. I've got a really dirty wash in there. You can choose your color. You may want to do a black wash or a dirty wash. And we're going to come in and just touch it to some corners and let it spread out. Okay, now the wheel wells on this plane remain a light gray. I'm going to come in with the original gray color, lighten with some white, and do some dry brushing. Okay, we've got our wash and our dry brushing. Now we can come in and pick some details out using some silver paint. I'm going to come in and pick out some of these hose fittings. Just do a little detail painting. Reference material really comes in handy in a case like this if you've got it. Otherwise, it's up to the imagination. Okay, now our decals have dried. I'm going to come in with some Future Fluoro Wax after I dust this area and spray over the top of the decal where I'm going to be putting some oil paint in those rivets. Just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put the oil paint right in and around these rivets. And do the same thing we did before with our oil paint. I'll come in and wipe off the excess.